Donald Trump wants to abolish the IRS and replace it with tariffs. Can it work? I like the idea personally, but I'm not exactly the most educated on economics. But I do like the idea of getting rid of the IRS and getting rid of the income tax, because I think that the idea of making the American people pay for making money is bad, and I think that there are other ways to generate income for the
Absolutely.
federal government.
And
From CNN, no one wants to pay taxes, and practically every American dislikes the IRS. But as the saying goes, the only guarantee in life are death and taxes. So the IRS is here to stay, right? Well, maybe not, according to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Donald Trump announces the External Revenue Service, and his goal is very simple: to abolish the Internal Revenue Service and let the outsiders pay, Lutnick said on Fox News Wednesday night. In other words, America will raise so much money from President Donald Trump's tariff plan that the Americans will no longer need to pay income taxes. This sounds great, but it's riddled with problems. Now, I do think the idea sounds great. I would love to see tariffs take care of the funding for the American government. I believe that tariffs were the majority of the way that the United States used to raise money prior to the income tax in 1913. Thank you very much, Woodrow Wilson, you bastard. Burn in hell.
easily the worst president ever.
He is the worst president.
Both in practice and morality.
Absolutely. But what do you think? Do you think that there is do you think this method would work, or do you think that it's a pie in the sky?
Well, I think it's a pie in the sky and that it would work. The reason why is because I want to be clear. If we have built so many systems now that rely on such an intense tax revenue that if we just pulled the Band-Aid off, it would absolutely blow out the deficit. It would eventually work itself out over time. But I think you guys were talking about this the other day about income taxes and how the rich don't pay their fair share. And income tax.
So glad Elaad's not here.
I know.
You should come back.
I waited for him to leave, actually. But income tax actually benefits rich people because, as we know, they don't pay they don't take an income. They got dividends and they got holdings and everything. If we got rid of the income tax and brought some sort of a VAT tax, a value-added tax, where you pay, we'll use a random number. You pay 10% tax on your milk and 10% tax on your yacht. That's actually a fair tax, as opposed to, a guy of Bezos, Musk, that, they have a $1 salary while all of us are sitting here paying 42%, and they're just living the high life. And to me, I'm thinking to myself, this is actually, it's going to make things a little bit more expensive, but it's going to make things a hell of a lot more fair. And, I think that would allow people, look, you want to buy your McMansion? I got no problem with that. You're going to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about I don't know if a value-added tax is. I'm not sure what the definition of value-added tax is.
It's basically just like it's basically
like a sales tax,
like a sales tax on
consumption
everything.
Tax.
Yeah,
because I like the idea of a federal consumption tax, because then you're not charged for saving money, you're not charged on making money. It depends on how much you spend, and if you want to go out and buy a yacht, well, then there's going to be a percentage of whatever you spend. The U.S. GDP is $29 trillion. Or something like that, gross domestic product. So if you had a percentage of the GDP coming in as a tax on sale, some kind of sales or value added or whatever you want to call it, I do think that the government could be funded. I also think that the government could probably cut their actual expenditures by a significant amount. And hopefully something like Doge is going to do that. But I do think that that's something that's worth discussing. Elaad, do you have thoughts on a value-added tax, or on getting rid of the IRS, or on tariffs? Or
we were just talking about you and you.
I'm not sure that tariffs would be able to make up for the shortfall.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that? Okay, Serge is pointing out, so that means tariffs would have to be at least 100% on all imported goods for tariffs to replace income taxes. I mean, this is CNN, and I don't expect CNN to have a positive outlook towards.
I don't think solely tariffs would be able to fund our government. Look, I don't love taxes. We live in a society.
Tariffs. Bold stance a lot. I don't like taxes.
Also, tariffs. It depends on how you view tariffs. Tariffs are actually a tax on you because they make products more expensive for you.
Well, there's There's arguments about that, but go ahead.
No, I mean, right. So if an item that it's to de-incentivize even buying it to begin with, but it's like, for example, I don't know, you buy a fancy shirt. If there's a tariff on a fancy shirt from Italy, 500% tariff, that money you'd have to pay for it to buy it, and then that money would go to the government. Still feels like a tax to me. Just
but here's the thing: is that the person buying that expensive Italian shirt,
or it's anything
can't
abroad.
afford it anyway?
No, you buy any item abroad because that's what the tariff would be, right?
Well, look,
you'd be.
I mean, if you look at a picture of Japan and you look at their cars, it's going to be all Japanese cars. And if you look at a picture of Europe, it's going to be all European cars. And if you look at a picture of America, it's all Japanese and European cars. Why is that? And
I feel like that's an argument for America, if anything, because Europe's a dump and Japan's dying. So if anything, it sounds like the U.S. is more successful importing those Japanese cars and European cars, allowing Americans to buy cheaper-made cars. I prefer American ones.
What I'm saying is that
with it.
Europe and Japan makes American cars more expensive so that they buy Japanese and German cars. So
We do the same thing.
not on all of them.
Many of them.
I guarantee you, if you go to Munich right now, you will not see an F-150.
Okay, so for example, Chinese EVs don't exist in the United States. We could argue about why.
Yeah.
I mean, no, we don't need to. It's because we banned them and the tariff makes it too outrageous to buy. So
That's China, not Japan.
sure. Well, I guess I'm kind of explaining to you guys the principle of what's going on here. Our free markets benefit you. Being able to buy goods from people worldwide is a benefit to you. It makes it more difficult for American salesmen who have to compete, and American businesses who have to compete on a worldwide market, but it makes it better for the purchaser.
But what it also does is it also helps the multinational corporation export their jobs overseas because they know they can bring it back in with no tariffs. And, you know, this is a long game sort of thing. This is not going to be an easy fix. But the fact remains is that there are so many companies that have fled, even with things like NAFTA, where all the Detroit motor companies all just made them in Mexico, brought them back over, paid slave wages, and they're making big bucks. And this is where I think the populist left and the populist right can actually come together. If you're an American company and you're going out of your way to screw over American workers, then you need to be punished.
I think it's a nice populist message, but if we get to the crux of the issue, it's affordability. So, I mean, we obviously can't tell what would have happened otherwise. But, for example, here's my fancy iPhone. I still paid around, $700-800 for it. And this is from components sourced from around the planet. And it's actually amazing that this product could even exist or do the cooperation of millions of different Americans across the planet. But how much would this cost if it was purely American made? Nobody would be able to have financial access to it. Nobody would be able to afford this.
They might not be able to afford to get the new one every single time. Maybe you skip an iPhone or two.
No, this one is no
3
different times, 4 times. Again, remember the slave labor you were talking about? This was made with Chinese slave labor. Could you imagine how much it would cost if we had to pay for American unions to make parts like this? It wouldn't be comparable. So a lot of the products that we have that we sort of take for granted. Look, that's not to say that there aren't issues with different multinational corporations and then, shipping different jobs overseas. But I think there's a balancing act of trying to understand the consequences of these policies. So free trade is what allows us to have this tech and other product revolution.
See, I think there's a balancing act between the corporation and the American consumer where, look, Apple, I love my iPhone. This thing has changed the world. But you know what? Maybe, just maybe, you might have to, Apple as a corporation should take for the good of America and for moral reasons, maybe the company should take a little bit of a hit on their bottom line, on their quarterly earnings and say, you know what? You're right. We probably could make this overseas for nothing, but I think more Americans would buy it if we made it here.
If American phones were made in America,
car
not
company,
more people would.
Yes, the first
Do you
car
know how much
company.
more the iPhone would cost?
I am telling you right now that if the CEO of Ford came out during the Super Bowl with a commercial and said, look, guys, we did ship our jobs overseas.
Americans don't give a crap about this not being made in America. Every American has an iPhone already, and it doesn't matter if it were made here. Not more Americans would have iPhones. Less would, because they would be 5 times more expensive.
So we'll use cars.
It would be unfathomably
The first
more
American
expensive.
car
Slave
company.
labor is what produces these iPhones. Remember,
it's not just slave labor. It's the fact that you can send it over there and have it be made and then send it back, and all of that transport cost is still less in the United States. You could actually take a lot of the regulations and get rid of them in the United States, and a lot of the problems that you get with unions and stuff, and the cost of producing these things would go down. But that's not something that you hear anyone actually discussing very often. Regulations are a significant contributor to the cost and the prohibition, or not prohibition, but the hurdles to producing things in America.
I mean, look, I was saying it before, the first American car company, Ford, GM, Chevy, to come out and say, look, our cars are going to be a little bit more expensive, but we're going to make them here. And we're gonna
different era.
I guarantee you, the first company that does that, there will be a pickup truck of that company at every construction site. Every soccer mom will be driving around in whatever SUV that company has.
No, they won't, because they
want
won't
to buy American.
They won't be able to afford it, unfortunately.
People want to buy American.
At 3, 4, 5 times the price?
But you're making up that.
No.
That
How much, again, this technology? You're saying that slave labor is involved.
So let's start with
this
cars.
stuff. People, we pay them
You're right.
on the
company
dollar,
is going to have to take a little bit of a hit.
No, the people would, because that's who's going to pay for it.
It's a give and a take.
Look, I mean, there are Teslas that are made in the United States.
Yeah.
Right? Like
there are some BMWs.
They're heavily subsidized, both here and when they're also built in China.
Well, they're heavily subsidized, but there's also massive regulations, and there's unions that you have to deal with as well.
Right.
So we could probably get rid of the subsidies if you got rid of the same regulations and the union.
Yeah, that's
and there's competition. Well, I mean, look, dude, you can smirk and kind of smile.
No,
about it,
because it's not. I don't think you're doing a fair example, because again, Tesla gets a ton of its parts and its workers abroad, and like the downstream
workers that are working in America. You think?
Phil, so a lot of the parts that Tesla,
Elaad.
So a lot of the parts that Tesla uses in the building of their cars, it's a global market. These items, these microchips, these all these processors.
I'm aware that no one can make a pencil. Elaad. I'm aware.
Okay.
I'm aware that no one can make no one person can make a toaster. No one person can make a sandwich. I know that the market. I know that there's a market out there, and that it's the market that makes it possible for all the parts to be put together. That's not saying that you couldn't make things in America, though.
I'm saying you can. It would just be a magnitude of order more expensive.
Based on the current structure of everything right now. You're forgetting that we could change the way things are. I agree with you. I understand your point. I totally do. But I'm saying that I think what he's trying to say is we should change the way that it works around here so that we have the ability to allow for American companies with incentives, which is the correct way to get people to do stuff, not by subsidizing stuff. You subsidize, you kill. Don't do that.
Yeah.
You incentivize American business to make things here for cheaper so that, like you said, you can have American-made cars and you don't have to have all these crazy send everything across the country, or send it across the world. Then we don't have to have a Navy taking care of everything. I also understand, though, that we need to have a Navy there. I also believe in our 11 carrier groups because they're sweet. But I also think that I see your point. I think what we're trying to say is we don't have to do things the way we always have done. There's a bias to want to do things the same way you've always done. You don't have to do that. You can do things differently, and we can radically change stuff. Look what we've been doing. So I understand what you're saying. It would cost more to do in America if you're basing off the current structure right now.
People
But
live paycheck to paycheck
I'm
right
aware.
now.
I'm aware.
People are complaining, right? There are issues with the rising prices of eggs. Now we're talking about these tariffs again that would affect the consumer in a negative way. I feel like there's a misunderstanding of what the tariffs are, because again, I still believe it's the purchaser who ends up paying the tax for it. Okay, I know that was a whole topic that we were hitting on there. If Trump is able to implement it properly, Trump has done, flipped the table on a lot of different policy proposals and how we handle things. Maybe we could check it. I have faith in Trump.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.